30 years later, I'm still trying to get a grip on it. Hi, I'm Darren Rye from 12 Church. When I was a young pastor many years ago, I decided I better figure out this leadership thing. Leadership was an important part of the ministry, it turned out, and I hadn't been overly equipped for leadership in school. And so I decided to make it a project and focus on leadership for an entire year. Just immerse in leadership, figure out leadership, and then, move on to other things. So I did what you did back in those days, pre-internet. I got a bunch of John Maxwell material, subscribed to his Enjoy Life Club. I followed up with some more resources from my lifelong mentor, Bob Beal. I went to conferences, I read books, and just started immersing in leadership. I started gathering quotes and illustrations and stories of leadership. When I did a search just recently on my computer in my database for the word leadership, I had over 1,200 documents that contained the word leadership. I heard all the sayings. Leadership is influence. A leader is a dealer in hope. The job of a leader is to instill vision. The job of a leader is to turn vision into reality. The first job of a leader is to define reality. The last job is to say thank you. I learned a lot about leadership, and I think I became a bit better leader, but it very quickly dawned on me before the end of that year that getting a grip on leadership wasn't just a one-year project. Because part of learning about leadership and growing as a leader wasn't just downloading theory and getting information, it was actually leading. And learning how to lead in the less structured, less clean-cut, predictable way, the way that includes people. And so leadership development for me has been a multi-year, multi-decade project, and I'm still learning and hopefully still growing as a leader. In the past few years, there have been a lot of leaders failing morally, sexually, or financial misconduct, or leadership malpractice, the way they're treating people. It's become somewhat epidemic. The past few months, I've listened to the podcast called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill from Christianity Today. And while I don't agree with everything they say or the way they evaluate everything, I think they have a certain philosophical and even theological posture, they do expose some very serious leadership problems at Mars Hill. And as I walked through those podcasts, it was like looking through a lens at some of the churches I've worked with. Looking through a lens at some of the pastors I've followed. In fact, one pastor in particular, as I listened to this Mars Hill podcast and heard how Mark Driscoll actually conducted himself, how he led, I realized that this one pastor I'd followed was clearly emulating him, both in his leadership style, his verbiage, everything else. There was talk about the bus and on the bus and off the bus and under the bus and dead bodies behind the bus. I also thought, as I listened to that podcast, about other pastors who maybe didn't emulate the Mars Hill leadership in the same way, but who still seemed to lead for their best interests rather than the best interests of the body. Sometimes they put their financial well-being ahead of the financial well-being of the church. Sometimes they put their reputation ahead of the reputation of the church, which is really quite the opposite of what a shepherd is called to be and do. I have to be honest though, it wasn't just like looking through a lens, it was like looking in the mirror. And I saw glimmers of myself and the way I had led at different moments and even different seasons of my leadership life. I thought of times when I had used power and verbal skills to kind of push an agenda that maybe wasn't as closely aligned to the kingdom as I would have said, but maybe more aligned with my kingdom and my ego and my best interests. And so as a result, these last few weeks in particular, I've been reflecting on leadership, particularly Christian leadership, particularly the question, what is a Christian leader? What is unique and distinct about Christian leadership? Certainly it's more than leading a Christian organization. Just because I'm leading or you're leading a Christian organization doesn't mean our leadership is Christian, Christ-like. I've wondered, what is the place of celebrity? What happens when you gain a high profile? How do you manage that as a Christian leader? Does Christian leadership require a certain level of charisma or physical attractiveness? Certainly, biblically, there is a spiritual gift of leadership, and unlike some people who say everyone's a leader, it seems to me biblically that there's a gift of leadership and not everyone is gifted as a leader. So I think Christian leadership probably calls for some kind of leadership gifting from the Spirit of God. Christian leadership, of course, contains this idea of shepherding and being a shepherd, which I think we misunderstand in a lot of ways. I'm pretty sure from studying Scripture that the biblical idea of what a shepherd is, what a leader is, a shepherd leader is not quite as warm and fuzzy as the pictures of Jesus that we saw in Sunday school. But nor is it quite as William Wallace as some of us might want it to be. Christian leadership really is about leading like Jesus. Jesus is the example, and Jesus was a servant. And just that concept alone just cuts through the fog of what Christian leadership is, because a lot of leaders today, both those leading Christian organizations and those outside the church, they are actually set up in a way that they are being served. And it's really hard to find how they are serving others. Certainly, I believe that Christian leadership, like Jesus, requires clarity of purpose, knowing who you are and what you're called to be and do. Christian leadership is in some way involved in seeking and saving the lost. Christian leadership must include being a disciple who makes disciples, even if you're not leading a church. And any other mission or vision or purpose, especially now in a Christian organization or church, must really align with the mission of Jesus and who he was and what he was called to be and do. Otherwise, it's not Christian leadership. One simple concept I've picked up from Jesus that we frame up in 12 Church as follow or not has certainly helped me. It comes from the story of where people were starting to leave Jesus because of his hard teaching about his flesh and his blood, and he asked his disciples, "You don't want to leave too, do you?" He actually gave them a chance to leave. He said, "You can follow me or not follow me. I'm not going to manipulate you or badger you or somehow try to convince you to follow me when that's not how you're inclined." I think that's a very helpful, very important principle in Christian leadership. I floated an idea by a few friends lately how it seems like a lot of our churches in particular are structured this way, that we build buildings to house services that include music, that sets up a message, that sets up a pastor, and ultimately feeds that pastor's ego. And how the central organizing principle of some churches almost seems to be building up that pastor's profile, platform, and ego. And the reason I can describe it so clearly is because I've seen that from personal observation of myself as well as external observation. Back to the Mars Hill podcast. I saw some things and heard some things that scared me in a good way. It caused me to do some self-examination about why I lead and where I lead and how I lead. Perhaps the best definition of Christian leadership I've come across was something I discovered in Arrow Leadership about 20 years ago. The slogan of Arrow was, and really still is, to be led more by Jesus, to lead more like Jesus, and to lead more to Jesus. I think that describes Christian leadership very well. And what I like about that definition is it doesn't require that you are in a position of leadership. All it requires is that you're hearing and responding to the voice of Jesus, following him, joining him on his mission, seeking and saving the lost, being a disciple who makes disciples regardless of what your vocation is. That's Christian leadership.